Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to the first episode of what I guess we're just going to go ahead and call Pimp My Unit here. So effectively what we're looking at here today is a response to a Reddit type of dealie. Now, posts on there come up all the friggin' time. 99% of the time it ends up being something along the lines of please just stop using basic attacks for everything, do something else. But in this particular case, we saw a comparison between two different builds and a sort of dynamic that we see come up every now and then. Namely, we see this situation where in this particular case, the comparison was between Murden and Denim, and specifically that Murden was essentially doing better with his basic attacks, and that the velocity shift was seen as generally more sexy than most of the stuff that the Denim had on hand. So, essentially, the thing that they were asking for was ideas on kind of spicing up their build, on getting more out of it, on making closing the gap between him and Murden there. And there's a lot of different reasons why this could potentially have been happening. You know, we might have just seen where Murden was fighting a water unit and Denim didn't have an advantage in that particular case. We might have potentially seen that he was maybe fighting a squishier unit and it wasn't realized at the time. There's a lot of different things that can potentially put their finger on the scale. And actually, I just noticed I forgot to clear out his items. So, first and foremost, I will say that this particular combination for the Rune Fencer is one that I think we've all kind of tried before at some point. But just to go ahead and start it off right here, notice that 2/3 of the actual finishers that we're running with here are non-elemental, which means that they're going to be a little bit more niche in terms of their usage. So if you're looking specifically for something to be a heavy hitter, you're going to want the elements in there as much as possible. Now, thankfully, in Reborn, retraining is not really a big deal at all. You just kind of throw them into a couple training sessions and they're good to go. But for example, everything about this weapon setup is semi-workable, but could use some help. So, for example, with the Balder crossbow, is this a bad choice? No. It's got a little bit of a bonus versus undead stuff. We've got a fire finisher for punishing ice units, though that said, ice units, not terribly common. And additionally, by this point, you can be running a Damask crossbow. Now, you can't upgrade the Damask crossbow, so the main reason you'd be running this, it looks like at this point they were at level 36, so presumably early Chapter 4. Main reason that you would stick with the crossbow past this point is that silencing effect, as well as to punish the occasional breached unit. So it's not terrible as an offhand, but it's understandable why it would seem a little underwhelming. Now, we've got a stop move over here in the form of Sanctus Flare. The Dull Bind isn't really going to do too much for you. But an AoE fire finisher is useful in the odd case that you run into more ice units. So it's got some niche use case. It's not terrible for the offhand. Like, we're just going to leave it there for the moment and throw out some alternatives. But just so you know, again, 2/3 of everything that we're running into finisher-wise for this unit so far are going to be more niche kinds of moves. Like, Dullbind is primarily there as a sort of way to bypass armor, since ranged units have the basic attack on a ranged unit will have that gigantic penalty applied to them until you get like a breach or an elemental counter or something along those lines. So you really want to be kind of looking for gaps in the armor, so to speak, when using the basic attacks. The Dullbind is more or less just saying, yeah, but what if I didn't know? When it comes to the Brimstone Hail, AoE is always good. Also, it's kind of interesting that it is actually cheaper than the Dullbind there. And then we've got the Sanctus Flare again with that stop there. Stop as a debuff is really useful in the case of, like, let's say a caster that has stop on a dagger, because in that case they can stop the unit, run away, kind of create a bit of a gap of sorts. Stopping a unit from already far away is not necessarily going to be as useful, at least in my opinion. Also, the dog says hi to the mailman, apparently. Hopefully he will stop in just a moment. Yeah, I think he's done. Anyway, now let's go ahead and talk about the other attacks here. So, swords in general, I would say, like, swords are probably one of the cozier options for Denim. Like, personally, on a speed run, I end up running swords on Denim because it ends up serving a lot of needs over the course of a playthrough. So, for example, Vile Wound, poison is always good. 10% is 10%, and Cherry Ronde is a nice little kind of AoE that can go and avoid situations like let's say somebody's perched way up on a cliff, and you can be like, well, technically this thing doesn't check for elevation, so, go ahead and hit him by standing next to the wall and stuff like that. It's a little more niche. Now, in this case, I will also point out that due to the fact that we've got an elemental mismatch with the air element versus an ice finisher, he's weak to his own finisher, so this is going to be doing a little bit less there. I forget the exact numbers off the top of my head, but that also could lead to some slight underperformance. And as far as the Rending Gale goes, it's just basically 2 regular hits. This is really good in some cases, like let's say you've got crit and fizz ups in the bank already, and it could scale up pretty well in that situation. But Rending Gale is kind of one of those, just like it's quick, and I guess might be just enough to finish something off, but most of the time you're going for the Vile Wound kind of situations. It's kind of interesting that these two completely switched roles since the PSP version there. And then if we go over to the spells here, I just noticed I think I have the wrong spell over here. I gave him an Ease 2 instead of a Heal 2. We've got the Heal 2, we've got the BOS, we've got an Ease, and we've got an Instill. Nothing wrong with that setup. We're going to go ahead and throw a couple more things on here, though. So Heal 2 for that section of the game is fine. Bear in mind, I'm not going back to go dig for a save file at 36. We're just gonna roll with this with what I've got on hand right now. But yeah, Heal 2 is gonna be fine for that section of the game. They don't have Heal 3 yet with Conserve MP set up on a fencer. Perfectly fine. Same thing with BOS. It's basically free. Just only use it if it's free. Otherwise, stick with using Ease. And Instill Air, again, combines with your personal element, so that ends up helping out. As a little bit of an alternative, because I always want to mention this, when it comes to actually defending that particular unit, if at any point they were having defensive issues, it is worth noting that if you put the Instill that they're weak to, you can also defend against the opposing element, covering that weakness somewhat. Now, first thing I would change on this is actually going to be the weapon. So, given where they are at the moment, we're going to assume it basically goes up to about here. That we've got everything from here on up, right? Now, this is fine-ish. Now, I will point out one thing. The difference between, let's say, the Korra and the Cutlass is not very significant. Like, as far as stats go, whether or not that 1 strength is worth the slight attack difference is entirely up to you. Parry rank is the same, but it is worth mentioning that swapping out for this one could give you a nice, happy false strike instead, which, having a 20% chance for all physical attacks to miss, including finishers, sounds like a pretty darn good value to me. Personally would go and combine that in with something like a Jewel the Avatar here. So now, if we can, for example, attach a counter attack to this thing, we could potentially be seeing 40% dodge odds from, anything that he was going in directly fighting. For another thing with the crossbow, I personally am not really a big fan of the sword and crossbow kind of overlap here, because we've got the AoE, we've got a debuff, we've got a sort of basic hitting move. They're largely going to be filling a similar role, not exactly the same, but similar enough. Now, there's a few different ways that we could go with this. For example, let's say we go for the bow instead. We could, for example, go for, let's say, a Balder Bow over here. We'll go ahead and throw the finishers on that one. And now we're seeing a bit of different coverage. We still see a shutdown move for that combination there, but now we're seeing something that'll get a bit more use out of our Instill there. We're getting a Flaming Blast, which also has a chance to charm a target, and we've got a Dark Weight, which will also slow down something along the way. So we're having a few different roles from, like, let's say there's a big threat, you have a chance to turn it around. Let's say there's something that's a little bit farther, like, let's say you're slightly short on using a Flaming Blast, so you're a little bit farther along, you need something to hopefully stay out of the fight for a couple of rounds. You can maybe roll for a chance to put it to sleep. You got flyers, you can make sure that they land on the ground, and now we've got a little bit better kind of overall coverage between our different moves, Granted, down the road, we still have that same shot, or that same Imperial shot here, which will give us lightning, a sort of water counter on top of a stop, so that's going to help out a little bit, but seeing as they have not gotten to that point, we'll go ahead and take those off. Now, this works. This is decent enough, but remember that this is a rune fencer. They don't necessarily need to be attacking all the time, and it's also worth mentioning that directly attacking something for a false strike, it's fine, but it may not necessarily be what you're looking for. Typically, the time that the False Strike Cutlass ends up coming into play is around the time that you start using things like the elemental short bows and stuff like that. So these are going to be early Palace of the Dead. You do have access to them around this point in the game, so if they wanted to, they could go get the bow crafting books. They could go get a crescent over from the Palace of the Dead, turn it into a Cupid bow, turn it into, let's say, an Excamilles, and now we've got a counter attack that we could go throw in that unit. They've got that counter fall strike. That's decently cozy, but we can also go another way with this instead. So let's say we go over to the Caldia here. And this is going to have some pretty awful hitting power in general, but we're going to go ahead and put the Caldia over there, and we're going to go ahead and put this sword over on this side. And let's say we're assuming that let's say they've done some elemental temples or something. They, let's say, have access to a Damask sword. So let's go ahead and slap that on there, and let's go ahead and say, do we want to replace Meditate or do we want to replace Conserve? I kind of feel like in this case, well, actually, no, we're going to start off with this, and then we'll go a different direction with it. So once again, we'll take off these ones at the very end here. And we'll go ahead and throw some Spell Strike powder on here for a little bit of help. Okay, so Spell Strike powder is basically the same thing as concentration, but you use it in an item slot. And so now essentially what we're seeing is that he is going to be going and getting an additional Int and Mind bonus off of using this in a main hand, which is going to still retain the ability to have that parry 2 from that other sword. It's still going to use the sword for the purpose of using these finishers over here, but at the same time, it's going to count for the purpose of his casting stats if, for example, we were to replace, let's say, this ease with something like a missile. So let's go ahead and I'll replace that with something like a Deadshot 3 that would be available at this point. So we've covered our long range option by means of our melee option, which also gave us further kind of melee attacks here. So we've still got our kind of fire AoE that we would have gotten from the crossbow. We've got our Guy Asunder here for the purpose of going and weakening something. And so this is particularly useful as a nice kind of counterpoint to what Murden usually brings to the table. Because in this case, a weaken, while it can be guaranteed from something like a Brand of the Sacrifice, if we wanted a nice, easy, replenishable source of the thing, Guy Asunder would be a nice, cozy way to make that happen. And weaken is going to be a 50% offense reduction from essentially from anybody that's hit by this, which is especially good versus bosses. So this is a really good boss debuffer over here. Good old Tyrant's Mace to give you a sort of ice thing. But now we're looking at our other issue here. Like in this particular case, now we've got 2 ice moves. I mean, this isn't really giving us a whole lot of elemental coverage, right? So let's go ahead and see if we can maybe go tweak this around a little bit more. So let's go ahead and take a look at our weapons here. Spear would end up taking both hands, so we're not going to go down that route in this case. But if we were to, once again, go back to the bows over here, while we would see some overlap down the road, if we were to, let's say, swap this out right now, it would give us some overlap as far as fire, give us a bit more debuffs. Still not necessarily feeling it. So let's go ahead and see what else we've got on hand here. I mean, we could optionally also just go a completely different direction with this and just go full debuffer. So let's say we get rid of those bow finishers entirely. Go ahead and replace this with concentration. And in this particular case, we don't even need the Black Lizard powder anymore. Now we've basically turned this into a full-blown caster type of deal. So we're already casting for free. We're essentially just using something like a stone throw in order to go get more auto cards to spawn, at which point we have free MP forever. We can go ahead and just BOS up to make everything go faster. And essentially Meditate is gonna feed our finishers, which we then use to abuse elemental bonuses, which will then lean into using spells at long range for everything else, and then from there they can just sort of support. And on top of this, this gives us 2 extra spell slots that we wouldn't normally have, giving us access to both Charm and Poison Cloud off of this. That's what we wanted that concentration for. I mean, it is a little bit more niche to go about it that way, but, you know, it's potentially an option. But let's say then we wanted to go lean into Spears in this particular case. And let's say he still wanted to go show up Murden there, right? So let's go ahead and say we swap him over to Spears entirely. And in this case, just remember that Spears are frickin' amazing. So, from the get-go, it's worth noting that if we go down the spear route, we're not going to be getting as good of a bonus from our spells, but in this particular case, we've got something like Ruination, nice, cheap, nice little peck move over there. If you need to get rid of defenses, Scythe Wind gives you a breach at, I mean, it's at close range. It's not going to be the same thing as just using a mead, but it is going to be a nice little cozy replenishable breach over there. And on top of that, Giga Tempest is going to be a nice big sweeper move, as I'm sure they're pretty well familiar. Now, This isn't particularly sexy on its own, but it does have a poisonous counterattack by going and using a poison in this case. Because as good as, let's say, being able to do some additional damage with that spear over here might be, if they don't get the kill, they don't get the kill. If they get distracted, they're moving on somewhere else. If they can't, if they can't find that target, if they can't, for whatever reason, go and actually finish the job, something like a Scorpion could, essentially allowing them to just continuously damage the thing even when they're not remotely close. And so, personally, this is one of the ones that I was really like running. Essentially, a Poison Spear and or a Breaching Spear, both are perfectly valid, so that's going to be either the Volge or it's going to be the Scorpion. You get your nice happy finishers, a decent utility on all of these. You go for a Recruit, which you then essentially you run in, you damage something, and then you attempt to go for the Recruit. Not exactly very useful in Hanging Gardens, but it is something that's useful in like 90% of areas, because the whole hit and recruit thing basically just gives you a free unit to play around with. Or optionally, could go for a little bit of, if we wanted to, let's say, insist on that crossbow. Let's go back to that previous one here, and let's say we wanted to have a guy that was just stubbornly about the debuffs for whatever reason. So we could, in this particular case, go full kind of debuff lord on this whole thing. Go back to the old concentration thing for that free poison, and essentially just go for kind of stop spam using meditate, and then go for free dead shots all the rest of the time. So essentially, just turning this guy into a sort of actually, this is kind of a build that you would see occasionally in Armored Core. We've got somebody kind of spamming those big boomy explosions until they find that one thing that'll stagger you. So this could work. Personally, I would probably go for a little bit more of a defensive instill here. So that's decent enough. Now, I will mention a few other little builds that they mentioned, potentially not necessarily... they mentioned, for example, wanting to use the Terenius, and so they heard that they were very good, but it felt slow. So let me explain a couple of things about this Terenius here. So obviously we're gonna throw a few little bits and pieces on here because I'm trying to kind of go back to that period more or less. Let's go ahead and get some of this equipment removed because it's auto-equipping stuff. I'll go ahead and go for these, go for some of these. So, one interesting thing is going to be relevant if by any chance this individual has ever played any RuneScape before. Because there's actually an entire kind of a suit of armor that is dedicated to casters. So, like, let's say they wanted to use the Terenius in this case, and they wanted to get a bit more kind of utility out of this breach effect that they have. So let me go ahead and move a couple of things around. And we'll go ahead and see how this plays out. So we'll leave that there, we'll put concentration over here, and we'll go ahead and put a nice happy rampart aura over here. So this is one potential way to kind of handle the whole thing. As far as, okay, let's go ahead and say Fearful Impact, because I think this is what they were going for in that particular instance. So the Fearful Impact setup, it's very, very useful if you're kind of targeting a specific thing and you know what you're going for. In a general sense, I will say one thing that I've kind of started leaning towards on the TK is making them a bit more kind of utilitarian, more of a passive debuff wave kind of situation. So let's go ahead and go back real quick to the build that we were literally just using earlier. Like, let's say, in this case, you wanted to create a unit that was just spamming devastation everywhere they went, right? So, if you're having issues with speed, note that every skill activation and every weapon swing is going to have a particular cost. So this is going to be this RT number over here. So activating it is plus 15 RT, and let's say we go over to that Zweihander. At minimum, that's going to be 31. So that's going to be 46 if we're going for this. If we're going for the breach combo, looks like we're going to be looking at 51, right? Now, for the sake of context, if we go over to our finishers, these finishers are just 15, just 20, just 25. These are relatively quick to shoot out, right? So in this particular instance, and by the way, the reason I keep bringing up this shield is that you can make it at this point, and I just personally love the idea of throwing on a Poison Cloud on a Terenius. But now, they've got their 30% at minimum. So whatever mind you give this guy, they're going to potentially kind of improve, right? So let's say, in this case, we wanted to, let's say we want to replace this, because this isn't necessarily going to help them very much. So let's say, I mean, it will help them, to be fair, just not as much as maybe it could. So let's say we go ahead and go Ring of the Mind here. You could go for the Ring of the Mind Plus, obviously, but apparently all of them are currently in use, unless I happen to have any. There we go, there's one. Go figure, I was already running this build on someone. So, in this particular case, we've now got a guy that's going to be pretty reasonably solid. He's going to be doing like roughly slightly higher than a basic missile spell in terms of his HP steal. His MP steal is always going to be a little bit kind of meh, but it's just kind of there in case you need to shut something down. You could, for example, go Instill Shadow and then turn him into a Dark Element. I mean, that's technically an option you could go for. I was trying to see if I had any alternative means to turn this guy dark. Like if you have the means to turn your denim into a dark element, this would be helpful because it would cover their weakness. In the meantime, Drain Mind will do just fine, seeing as you can kind of shoot that out to go shut down a finisher. Now, here's the downside of what would normally be going on in this particular situation. You've got Drain Heart that's going to cost 30, that's a little bit more than usual. Something like Sleep or Paralytic Wave, though, these are cheap. You'll almost always have these available. On top of this, we're running Concentration, so we'll always have at least minimum 30% odds to go and hit something. And I also want to point out, when I go and show this off in just a moment, this version of Denim is... I basically avoided using charms on almost all units on my way through this thing, and dumped absolutely all of them on this chicken over here. So... so just so you know, we are going to be running a roughly on par kind of situation. Technically, Murden is a little bit behind in terms of his spear skill, but we can just go ahead and slap probably like a spearman's earring or something like that for helping him out there. Currently, those are in use by Bayan, of all people. Okay, let's go ahead and take that away from you, and we'll go ahead and suddenly boost up his spear skill using an item that he technically wouldn't have had yet in this example. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and pop that sucker in here, and there we go. Okay. Now, in this particular case, we'll probably still stick with that dodge item. Might potentially go for a Spirit Stone if we know that he may need some healing coming up. Additionally, would probably, let's see here, probably would keep one Mending Salve on him for good measure. Typically, I recommend Mending Salves +1. It's going to be a 75% heal. If you've survived something at 75%, you realistically, that's probably all you're going to need. You basically get an extra 10 recovery time using the Essence, usually wasting that extra 25% anyway. So I'm going to put that there, and then if he needs to top off, we'll, I guess, round it off with a Fruit of the Adept. You can make these for very cheap at the store. These are just going to be a simple 10% heal to your HP and MP, a nice little top-off item if you're between rounds. And then we're going to run full Balder to give him a additional 16 intelligence here. And then we'll go ahead and run a Ring of the Mind as well. Now, we're not going to be doing Sand Bronze in this situation, but let's go ahead and kind of throw him into the standard Almoric training situation, just kind of compare the two side by side. So we'll go ahead and take everybody else off the pile here, and get the two buddies going and doing their thing. So obviously this is going to be at a little bit of a higher level than they would normally have at that point. But either way, it still should be the same thing. And if you don't have that Dragon Scale Shield, it is worth just going and using, let's say, a Balder Shield, which will also give you another intelligence bonus, because again, it's all basically just magic metal type of nonsense. Anyway, so, Martin's going to go ahead and get that velocity shift going, and that one's always going to be exciting. It's a, it's a favorite for a reason. Looks like standard hits are roughly in the 250 to 300 range, and versus this guy, it's going to be noticeably more. No notable elemental advantages in this particular situation, so no water units. But if this was a water unit, it probably would be doing about 500-600-ish, give or take. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and leave him about right there. And we've got our concentration going from Denim already. And now, while he doesn't have the stuff put together to get his other stuff going, we can see he's already up at pretty darn decent odds for actually going and damaging these guys. We're going to go ahead and up ourselves with a Jewel of the Avatar. If he was a little bit closer, we might go for one of those debuffs. And this is usually why I like running this particular build with something like a Damask Mace. But for that, you'd want to set them up with a bit more additional MP. So anyways, in this case, he'll just go for his basic stabs as you do, hold still to avoid getting any additional stuff. So currently the score is 250 in his favor. We've got that ninja that showed up over there with some poison. Actually, you know, I never really pay attention to the stuff that spawns on this map. I didn't ever realize that the poison ninja guy is actually over there. Anyway, so he's going to go take some hits for people. All well and good. They're currently focusing him down because we have some additional stuff, and there we go, we get our Lament of the Dead going right away. And then we're going to go ahead and take our Poison Cloud, and we're just going to go ahead and Toxicify all of these guys. He's currently running a surplus of MP. He's going to go ahead and pick up a skill card. And the kind of beauty of builds like this is that they benefit an absolute ton. And as you can see right there, he basically already did a 450 in this case, despite the other guy doing dramatically less. And sure, we can make the whole argument over the fact that the Bardish is a bit more kind of out of whack at this point, but look, there's going to be too many potential angles in that particular one. Anyways, we'll go ahead and Scythe win this guy, go for that Breach. He's going to go ahead and pick up a Fizz card to see if he can maybe catch himself up a little bit. He caught up, with another 450 there. We're going to see another 450 popping out in a few seconds here, possibly even beyond that. That's kind of the beauty of Poison there. And then we've got a number of units that are now getting frightened, and as you can see, they're roughly on par speed-wise. We can go ahead and use the finisher from this Caldia over here to, again, match him in terms of damage, and do a lot more versus this guy that's hit with fear and everything else. So, this is, again, just to show that when it comes to these different abilities, basic hits, they really don't scale up to things like finishers or debuffs or whatever else. Like, we've essentially seen our damage quadruple from that Fear Breach combo, and as far as whether or not this stuff can spread, well, you're seeing the difference right now. And let's say, he were to go stab this guy, he would be up to an 885 with those two debuffs stacked together. Would be a little bit overkill in this case. He doesn't really have a finisher active to go take more advantage of that. So we'll go ahead and go for this. For the sake of comparison, he's also still getting an additional, I believe it was 50 attack, courtesy of that physical card, so that also is going to be another thing putting its finger on the scale. But once a unit is stripped of its defenses, but even then, that poison is still going, and as you saw, they wasted a turn to use an ease there, which again is providing a further benefit of just then allowing you to, to basically waste their time, more or less. Now, at this case, we see that we're now in potentially a better position, and we see that this guy's about to die, and we can go ahead and charm him because his turn's coming up right here. He'll either die or he'll help us. Possibly both. I guess he did die. Bit of a shame. Anyway, we still saved MP for later. Now we see that he is doing a decent bit better as far as tanking, though, despite our shield and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and get him his second physical card here. We'll go ahead and go for that finisher to sweep these two up right here. No real notable kind of benefit for finishing off that guy early, but just in case, So that guy will go for that poison over there. And then we get to talk about the old health stealing thing. So when it comes to health stealing, that one's a little bit more niche. So obviously we're getting a lot of debuffs going and whatever else, but this is another cool benefit of this particular build. See, in this particular case, I didn't, for example, end up picking up any match-up cards on him or anything along those lines. But this allows him to spend his MP two different ways. So, like, let's say he were to go and smack these guys with that ice on air over here. That would be pretty notably powerful, And on top of that, when it comes to, let's say, shutting down a boss, Gaia Sunder really wouldn't be too much of a downside either. But with this health draining thing, while you can, for example, go for your physical hits and such, this does also mean that if you, for example, go for... I don't know why I keep saying for example. Stop saying for example. It's just like a weird mental tick. Anyway, if he, let's say, gets crits or match-ups, he can end up healing himself a pretty decent ton by going and exploiting that fear effect, because it does boost your ability to drain health and just kind of do damage with everything as well. So this means that it's got a pretty decent amount of longevity, but the beauty of all of this stuff is that he doesn't necessarily have to actually kind of keep himself... constantly using additional skills. He doesn't have to keep activating Fearful Impact. He just basically keeps spamming all of these automatic abilities and these debuffs, all of which are very cheap time-wise. And the cheaper that you can make your turns be, the more stuff you can get done in less time, Not to mention being able to do this to multiple units means that he basically has his pick of targets whenever he wants to. So let's say right here, we'll go ahead and go over this direction, and we'll go ahead and drain heart over in this way, and hopefully he ends up getting his crit again. Does end up getting that crit, and that's a pretty decent amount extra on him. And additionally, because he didn't spend much time, that'll end up putting him back into a pretty decent position here. We'll go ahead and take out these two over in this direction. So again, as far as how much value somebody can potentially be providing, it's at the end of the day, it's still a team effort. So despite, for example, his initial hit primarily coming from poison, it took until Murden was running 2 physical cards for him to still keep up with that 1 debuff. With all these hitters here, that fear is basically creating constant setups for big sweeps. So like right here, just the sheer numbers that it's allowing to kind of go and spread across everywhere means that we don't necessarily have to worry about who would have been better stats-wise, because those stats got left in the dust. They're basically a starting point. Whereas at this point, we're more or less just running around stealing health from everything, doing big old hits and what have you. And in fact, here, if we... Alright, forgot I rebound that button. Rebound my, my chariot button to not exist. Anyway... what I was trying to show is that I could have pretty much hit more or less as hard with that physical card and the ice finisher, but it's not really necessary. Hopefully you get the point. So one of the added benefits, by the way, one of the reasons that we ran Rampart Aura, despite the fact that he's not actually blocking anything, is this sort of honey trap effect, where this one unit is going to basically sit in the open and trap a bunch of units around him. He's not directly going out of his way to attack them. He's using a lot of more kind of passive attack methods, as it were. But in this particular instance, he is still essentially getting all of them in that fear bubble because they're trying to get past him, but getting stuck, which gives more opportunities to go and hit with that effect. Anyways, so in this case, we've got that going. We can just go ahead and use one of these Fruits of the Adept over here. Give us ourselves a nice little happy top off over there. And benefit of all of this is that he's still running parry on top of all of it as well. So it seems like that will be enough to finish off those two, so we'll go ahead and make that happen. Unfortunately, basic attacks can be parried. You can't parry poison! But no, we're kind of getting a bit off track, but yeah, as far as making any unit fancy, just more debuffs, more finisher variety. There's a lot of ways you can go about it. Just forget about those basic attacks. Just forget that lame-o stuff. We're not about that life over here. Yeah, for the sake of comparison, actually, he doesn't even have a physical card, so theoretically, here, let's go ahead and pick up a physical card, and so this... He could be doing 2,000 with this right now because he's got 2 crits, which means his crit odds are very, very high. So without that elemental bonus, it would be about there. With that physical card, it ends up boosting it up a decent ways, or we could just go ahead and hit him right now. Unfortunately, did not decide to go and take that very high crit chance because that was like 60-something% at this point. But you get the idea. You get the idea. I would hope anyway. So, yeah. Let me know if you're at some other point in the game where you would need something shown off, and if you'd like some weird builds for it, because there's a lot of ways you can go about it. Just try not to create overlap, Alright, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.